Dear Indian friends, greetings from Bell'Italia 88 and welcome back. I am Caterina Brazzi-Castracane, I am an historian and I am here in collaboration with the Italian Culture Center in New Delhi to share with you another appointment dedicated to the rediscovery of some wonderful cities in Italy. And in this direction, today we are going to talk about Ferrara, a small wonderful city in the north part of the Italian peninsula in that region called Emilia-Romagna, region that actually we had already discovered together talking about other important cities as Parma and Ravenna. And Ferrara that really could be considered as a perfect example of a cultural city, even because it was partially redesigned during the first part of the Renaissance time to be the perfect icon of an ideal city. And in one way, Ferrara is still today an ideal city. Because the idea that I would like to share with you today is that this cultural and historic city was transformed during the centuries into a wonderful and livable place. This in particular means that still today Ferrara is one of the best places to live, a place where it's possible to move around by bike, discovering amazing architectures realized during the centuries and partially protected by UNESCO as a cultural heritage, a place where it's still possible to taste amazing traditional foods that you can consider as the touchable proof of a specific policy of welcoming, so typical at the Estense court during the first part of the modern age. Traditional foods that were destined to be part of the gastronomical heritage of this city. A city that is still today remarked by the presence of one of the oldest universities of Europe, because actually the University of Ferrara was originally founded in 1391, and a city where the historic center is almost entirely surrounded, as another important Italian city, Lucca in Tuscany, by massive city walls and shaded woodland areas. In one word, Ferrara is still today a small paradise perfect to live. This town was originally founded as a Byzantine military settlement, and for us it's important to remember that the most remarkable part of this huge history is basically related with a specific period between the last part of the Middle Age and the first part of the Modern Age, period when in particular the development of Ferrara was closely linked with the Este Dynasty, a family who managed the power for about 3 centuries and who definitely transformed it into a modern city. A wonderful and powerful city, so important during that time that the Swiss historian Jacob Burckhardt argued that Ferrara could be considered as the first real example of a modern city in Europe. This was also possible, even because between the 16th and the 17th centuries, the city underwent an imposing urban planning program destined to be remembered as the Addizione Herculea and aimed to enlarge the original medieval town. At the same time, the city was transformed in the perfect house for a wonderful cultural court, according to the new Renaissance taste. In this important and historical development, the princely family of Lombard origin called Este had a role of first importance, because this dynasty actually ruled the city of Ferrara for about 3 centuries, starting from the year 1264, when a member of this family, Obizio II, was named perpetual lord of Ferrara by the people. During that 3 centuries, the city was completely transformed for the will of the Este family into a wonderful capital of Renaissance, especially cultivating an intellectual environment in court. Still today, the historic center of Ferrara is basically composed of two cities in one. Because the idea that I would like to share with you is that the ancient part of this historic center He is still today represented of a medieval part of the city that was originally realized around three important buildings, the Cathedral, the Castle, and the Communal Palace, that later will be recalled Ducal Palace, according to the new title that was given to the Este Dynasty at the end of the 15th century. But beside this ancient part of the city, we can find the Renaissance one. A new quarter realized for the will of another important member of this family, Ercole I, and named after him, and realized with the real first European urban planning program. Using this ancient map, we can recognize the different parts of this city. First of all, the center of the power, basically related with this area that is composed by three main buildings, as I said before: the cathedral, the castle, and the communal or ducal palace. Around this center of power, we can find different quarters realized during the Middle Age, and in particular, a specific part of the historic center that is here behind the cathedral, that was destinated to house the Jewish community of Ferrara after the year 1492. In the higher part of the map, we can recognize this part of the city, that is basically the Addizione Herculea, the new quarter realized during the Renaissance time to be the perfect icon of beautiful and modernity linked with the Este family. Still today, the religious center of Ferrara is the cathedral. Cathedral that actually was built before the arrival of the Este family in Ferrara for the will of another important aristocratic man, Guglielmo degli Aleardi, and by the hand of an important architect-sculptor called Niccolò. The church was dedicated to St. George and consecrated in the year 1135. Still today, the most remarkable part of the exterior of this temple of faith is the facade, realized during the centuries according to different artistical styles. First of all, was chosen to realize the facade, the Romanesque one, that is still visible for us in the lower part of the facade. This part without any particular characteristics, while the second part of the facade, the higher starting from the second level, was realized later during the next centuries according to a new artistical style called Gothic, in particular with a French declination of this style that is recognizable just seeing the different example of small columns and arches used to create another kind of effect look into the facade. Still today, the most important part of the facade is represented by the main entrance, basically composed of two parts put together. First of all, the entrance, the real entrance, that is a wonderful example of an important decoration realized inside the arch vault with the figures of Saint George while he is winning over the dragon that is the perfect representation of the devil. While the higher part was realized later about 1250, realizing this imposing Gothic loggia realized with three different arches, the figures of the Holy Virgin Mary with the child in the center, and with on the top the figures of Christ on throne, surrounded by an imposing representation of the Last Judgment. Also, the right side of the exterior of the cathedral was realized according to the Gothic style, in particular with the creation of two galleries of small columns of different shapes that you can see here in this part of this photograph. This is the first gallery, and this is the second one. But as you can notice, also the ground level is remarked by the presence of another kind of architectures. Actually, another interpretation of a loggia, in this case called Loggia of Merchants, and realized since the Middle Age to house the traditional shops of Ferrara. Still today, the square that is called Piazza Trento e Trieste is the public square destined to house the important public markets during the year. The bell tower is a wonderful example of, unfortunately, an unfinished bell tower, probably designed for the first time by the end of Leon Battista Alberti, who had arrived in Ferrara after he had spent some time in Rome. And this bell tower was realized to be an icon of the third artistical style used to build this important cathedral, the Renaissance one, because it was realized using pink and white marble, and also with the presence of this huge example of columns so typical of that period, while the rediscovery of the ancient Rome was completely transforming the artistical way to understand and to interpret the new world of art. Unfortunately, the interior was completely redesigned during the 18th century by the hand of Francesco Mazzarelli, and the cathedral was completely transformed from the original style. But still today, the cathedral houses two important masterpieces realized during the centuries to be the icon of two different moments of the past. First of all, the huge fresco realized by the master Bastianino for the apside of the cathedral, and that could be considered a perfect reinterpretation of the same theme already realized by Michelangelo for the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Actually, if you compare these two frescoes, you can find a lot of similarities, in particular looking to the figures of Christ, to the Holy Virgin Mary, and to all the saints that surround them. The second important masterpiece is a masterpiece of Guercino, realized in the year 1629, and this painting could be really considered as a sort of iconical representation of the Baroque way of painting, because the theme of the martyrdom of St. Lawrence that you can see here in this part of the painting was here enlarged with the celebration of modernity, that you can notice looking to the clothes of all the characters, but also looking to these important architectonical elements that were realized by Guercino to transform the atmosphere of the scene. In particular, the two huge columns aimed to separate the painting in two different scenes, but also the representation of this ideal city at the background of this painting. In front of the cathedral, there is still today this important palace, originally built to be the communal palace, transformed to be the ducal palace, and now considered as the Gear Hall of Ferrara. It was enlarged for the will of Ercole I, with the creation of two more spaces inside it. First of all, a private court behind the facade of the palace, and also with a sort of private garden called Garden of Duchesses, realized behind the private court. The private court is considered still today a sort of a private square inside the building, while the garden was realized according to the new interpretation of the medieval Hortus Conclusus, transformed into a sort of a secret garden, so popular during that time. The facade was completely redesigned during the first part of the 20th century, in particular with the creation of this huge tower dedicated to the victory and also to the memory of the death of the First World War. The style that was chosen to rebuild this facade was a new interpretation of the Gothic one, called for this reason a neo-Gothic. The original entrance of the palace was called Volto del Cavallo, the face of horse, and it is still today remarked by the presence of these two important monuments realized to celebrate the power of two important members of the Este Dynasty, a column and an arch, probably also in this case originally designed by Alberti, with two bronze statues dedicated to Niccolò III on horse and to Borso d'Este, sitting in this case on a false stool. Borso d'Este is one of the most important members of this family, because he was declared the first Duke of Ferrara in 1471. Still today, the Ducal Palace is partially linked with the huge castle that is the icon of Ferrara. A castle that was originally created, in this case for the will of Niccolò II, who, feeling himself in danger, decided to order to one important architect of that time, Bartolino da Novara, an important and huge fortress dedicated to St. Michael. The castle during the centuries was transformed into the icon of, in one way, a despotic power link with the Este family, but in another way of a perfect icon of a medieval castle destined to be the tangible proof of the golden age of this city. And this is one of the reasons why this amazing place was transformed into a wonderful museum, a museum dedicated to the history of Ferrara, but also to the history of the Este Dynasty, reorganized recently by the genius of the contemporary architect Guy Aulenti, according to new ideas of museography, and this castle was in this way destined to be the perfect temple of the memory of this city. But for us, this castle is also an icon of Ferrara, also because it was several times represented by another important genius of the contemporary art, Giorgio de Chirico, who actually spent some times of the dramatic period of the First World War in Ferrara, where he realized the first masterpieces of his career. In particular, in the year 1918, he realized this wonderful painting called Le Muse Inquietanti, where he definitely transformed the medieval castle of Ferrara into something rarefied, something new, probably something that we can consider out of the physical world, according to the taste of painting of Giorgio de Chirico called metaphysica. And in particular, this new interpretation of the castle was since that time destined to be the enigmatical representation of the contemporary restlessness. You have to imagine that the Este Dynasty at the same time didn't realize only important example of a fortress as the castle that we had discovered together, but also other important kind of residences destined to house only activities related with fun and recreation. Today, this system of different kind of palaces is called the system of delizie estensi. Delizia is the Italian word that can indicate it, something wonderful, something linked with pleasure. And in particular, among them, the Este decided to realize a wonderful example of this new kind of palace in downtown in Ferrara. This palace is called Palazzo Schifanoia because of the motto avoid boredom, that you can translate in Italian as schivar la noia. And the palace was originally realized in a green area near the river Po, not so far from the downtown. And it was re-transformed and enlarged during the next centuries, in particular with the hand of Francesco del Cossa, who was called to realize this elegant marble portal, a sort of perfect representation of the power of the Este family. But in particular, the palace is well known because of this amazing hall at the noble floor. This hall is dedicated to the representation of the month, of the zodiac, and of the important court of Borso d'Este at the end of the 15th century. It was realized with an important iconographical program that was thought by the astrological master Pellegrino Prisciani and by the hand of important Ferrarese painters including Cosme Tura. And in particular, this hall is the perfect celebration of that period that we can consider as the golden age of Ferrara, linked with the figures of Borso d'Este and later, after him, Ercole I, the man who created the real ideal city in Ferrara. In this case, all the iconographical theme was organized on the wall in 3 different levels. In front of you, in this case, there is the representation of the month of April, where the higher level was dedicated to Venus as the ancient deity linked with the month. The second one was dedicated to the zodiac, and in particular here you can see the bull, that is the second sign of the zodiac, while all the higher part of this huge decoration was linked to the rule of the court, and in particular with a specific emphasis of Borso d'Este as a good, perfect lord. All these frescoes were realized by a generation of painters designated, as we remember, as the Ferrarese school, and well known for the ability and also for the inventiveness of different elements and thematics, and also to had transformed the real culture court of Ferrara of that time into different icons of art. Because you have to imagine that the cultural court of that time was so representative of a status of the dynasty who managed the power to be the perfect iconographical team to represent on the wall of the different palaces that were covered with artistical masterpieces during that time. And this really happened for the will of two among the most important members of this family, Borso d'Este and Ercole, his half brother. Two men who really changed the architecture of Ferrara, but also the world of art and culture in general of Ferrara. In particular, organizing different important policy of patronage of arts, including literature. This is one of the reasons why three among the masterpieces of the Italian literatures link with the Romance epics, the masterpiece by Boiardo, Ariosto and Tasso, were realized in Ferrara and dedicated to the Estensi court during 1 century. The first poet who dedicated his poem to the Duke of Ferrara, Ercole I, as you can read in this part of this ancient document, was Matteo Boiardo, who interpreted the history of the hero Orlando in one specific way that later will be reinterpreted in another way by Ludovico Ariosto, who gave us the masterpiece called L'Orlando Furioso, published 3 times during the 15th century, and in particular dedicated also in this case to the Este Dynasty. The last one is Torquato Tasso, who wrote the Gerusalemme Liberata, another important Romance epic, and in this case dedicated to one of the last members of the Este Dynasty, Alfonso II. If these masterpieces that are basically the most representative part of the Italian Renaissance literature were realized in Ferrara during that time, you have to imagine that that period was really the golden age of this city. But not only the aspect link with the culture was realized during that time, because Ercole I was really an important man who projected to create another town according to the new taste so popular, and in particular to the new idea of ideal cities. In particular, he decided to enlarge this town with the creation of this new quarter destined to be well known for the beauty and also for the modernity that was realized with the creation of new boulevard and one example of palaces. To realize this important new quarter, considered as Terra Nova, as a new country, not a normal new part of the city, was called the architect Biagio Rossetti, one of the most interpreter of the Renaissance architecture. He realized a real new town that was quickly considered a sort of touchable proof of the power of the Este Dynasty and destined to be remembered as the perfect interpretation of an ideal city. The same architect realized this palace that is maybe the icon, real icon of the Renaissance city of Ferrara. A palace realized inside the new quarter and called Palazzo dei Diamanti, Diamond Palace, because of the unusual shape of the over 8,500 marble blocks on the facade. This wonderful palace was realized for the will of another member of the Este Dynasty, brother of the Duke Ercole I, Sigismondo d'Este, and since the year 1832 was destined to house the National Gallery of Ferrara. National Gallery that is basically composed of important religious paintings realized during the modern age, but where our houses are also important example of fresco cycles that arrived here from important other small churches of Ferrara. But actually, also the ground floor of this palace was transformed into an important cultural space destined to house the temporary and the international exhibition. This part of Palazzo dei Diamanti, in particular, used to organize the important exhibition dedicated to another important generation of Ferrarese painters that used to work between the 19th and the 20th century. In particular, Boldini, Previati, and De Pisis are among the three names most important of the international art of the last centuries, and they were really able to transform the idea of Ferrara as a city of arts also after the Estensi period. In particular, starting a new era, a new contemporary era, where Ferrara was still important in the art ambit. And together with them, we can name an important cinema director, an important and international cinema director, Michelangelo Antonioni, who definitely transformed Ferrara also into an icon of the new cinema. In particular, among all the different masterpieces that he realized during his life, he realized with Wim Wenders, another important director, an amazing film called Al di là delle nuvole, Behind the Clouds, basically organized around the 4 different plots, and one of these plots was completely shot in Ferrara. With this film, Ferrara was definitely transformed into an open-air museum, something that is closely linked with the contemporary idea of this city, where, especially in the wintertime, all the atmosphere of this huge monument, the clouds, and the particular winter temperature transform everything in something where really space and time maybe don't exist, and everything is out of the world. In another way, the same atmosphere of the Chirico transformed in something rarefied, where everything is over the physical representation of the world. Recently, to this master of the international cinema was dedicated the contemporary art pavilion of Palazzo Massari, an important new space dedicated to the cinema, and also in particular to him, to celebrate all the films that he realized during his life. But the last myth of Ferrara that I would like to share with you, and that I would like choose as the perfect guide with which make the last part of our itinerary is Giorgio Bassani, one of the most important author of the contemporary literature, and a man who wrote a lot of different important romances, including The Occhiali d'Oro or The Garden of Fizzi-Contini, that is maybe one masterpiece of the Italian literature, and also of an important film that was shot after the book. All different romances that Bassani put together in this huge romance called the Romanzo di Ferrara. Bassani was originally a member of a Jewish family. He was born in Bologna, but he spent the first part of his life in Ferrara. And with him, we can rediscover a different part of this city, partially transformed during the Second World War and before, during the dramatic period of the fascism. He is buried in the Jewish cemetery in Via delle Vigne, and this funeral monument was realized by the artist Arnoldo Pomodoro. But working with Bassani also means rediscover the ancient Jewish quarter of Ferrara called Ghetto in Italian. And this part of the city is interesting for us also because it is the remarkable proof of that policy of welcoming I was talking about before, that transformed Ferrara in one of the cities that accept the Jewish community after the year 1492. In particular, the Sephardic community that was escaping from the Spain. All the ancient ghetto was transformed into a place of memory, and walking around in this part of the city really means looking for the touchable proof of also the dramatic history of the Shoah. But to discover together the ghetto of Ferrara is also a possibility to rediscover something taste and something linked with the gastronomical tradition of this city. Because you have to imagine that live together with the Jewish community since the first part of the 16th century really means that a different part of the different kitchen were during the centuries put together to create something else. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of different Jewish dishes were transformed during the centuries, in part of the aristocratical table, with a specific kind of recipes realized with the inspiration of the Jewish community. And still today, these important recipes are part of the gastronomical heritage of Ferrara in general. And walking around the ghetto, you can find several important restaurants that are there to offer to you important and typical foods as the amin or the albondigas or all the different celebration of the pumpkin. Realized that during the times putting together the Jewish point of view about kitchen with the Christian one. This is an important aspect that is basically linked with the idea of Ferrara as a cosmopolitan town, something that was really created during the past, but that is still real today. At this point, I stop sharing with you my screen to say thank you very much for your attention, and we will see again during the next month to discover together other important and wonderful cities in Italy. Thank you very much. Bye bye, and see you the next time.